Welcome back, dear listeners. I'm Davis, speaking to you from the curious case, where even the calmest streets hold whispered secrets. Tell me, what warm drink is in your cup tonight, and where are you listening from? Share your answers below, and remember to subscribe for tomorrow's cozy tale. Now settle in, because tonight's mystery begins with one small detail almost everyone overlooked. Ashwood House appeared at the turn of the lane, quiet, still, settled in its own habits. Miss Marple stepped out of the cab with a small nod. The driver wished her a good afternoon. She thanked him softly, then turned toward the front steps. A faint scent reached her first. Not strong, just present. Lavender, mixed with something warmer. She paused. She always paused when a house greeted her before its people did. The door opened. Mrs. Helena Bramwell stood there, leaning lightly on the frame. Her smile was gentle but tired. "Miss Marple, how good of you to come." Miss Marple returned the smile. "My dear, you make too much of it. I am delighted to see you." Mrs. Bramwell guided her inside. The hall was tidy. Not perfect, not careless, just lived in. But Miss Marple saw something small. A glove on the table. Only one, placed too neatly, as if someone wanted it to look forgotten. A small detail, but details were never small to Miss Marple. "Clara will be so glad you're here," Mrs. Bramwell said. "She has been the greatest comfort to me, truly." There was affection in her voice, and worry beneath it. "Clara Wentley?" Miss Marple asked. "Yes, my companion, such a dutiful girl, always on her feet, always helping. I don't know what I would do without her." Miss Marple nodded. The tone was sincere, but the emphasis in the words, "don't know what I would do," carried a note she recognized. Dependence, mixed with uncertainty. She had heard it before in many homes. They reached the drawing room. A soft scent brushed past again. Stronger here. Lavender, and something sharper. Miss Marple did not comment. She never commented too early. Clara Wentley entered with quiet steps. A polite smile, pale eyes, a slight flush that rose too quickly when she saw Miss Marple. "Nice to meet you," Clara said. "Such a pleasure, my dear," Miss Marple replied. Clara's hands shook, just a little when she poured tea. The cup rattled against the saucer, only once. But Miss Marple saw it. She always saw the first tremor. Mrs. Bramwell chatted about the house. Clara added a word here and there. But Miss Marple noted the silence between them. Not cold, not hostile, just stretched, as if something had been spoken recently, or avoided recently. A door opened behind them. Mrs. Edith Grange stepped inside, the housekeeper, tall, straight-backed, eyes that judged before they welcomed. "Good afternoon," she said, flat tone, measured tone. Her glance toward Clara was brief, and not warm. Miss Marple returned the greeting with kindness. Mrs. Grange acknowledged it with the smallest nod. In that moment, Miss Marple felt the shift. A quiet shift, the kind that sits under a house like a slow-moving draft. Something unspoken, something waiting. She touched the glove on the table again with her eyes. One glove, placed too neatly. Something was wrong here. She felt it, and she hadn't even been shown her room yet, when the first clue quietly waited at the top of the stairs. The drawing room settled into a quiet rhythm. Polite voices, soft movements, but the calm did not settle evenly across the room. Miss Marple watched Clara Wentley stand near the tea tray. The girl's hands stayed close to her sides. Careful hands, hands that feared a single mistake. She adjusted the sugar bowl twice, then stopped, then adjusted it again. Mrs. Edith Grange entered with a tray of small cakes. Her steps were firm, her chin raised just enough to signal authority. She placed the tray down with a motion slightly sharper than needed. Clara flinched, only a little, but enough for Miss Marple to see it. "Thank you, Mrs. Grange," Mrs. Helena Bramwell said. Her tone was gentle, but Mrs. Grange's eyes did not soften, not even slightly. Miss Marple noticed the glance, quick, narrow, from housekeeper to companion. A glance that carried warning, or judgment, or worry. Hard to tell which, but it was there. Clara stepped back. Her arms folded for a moment, then unfolded. She forced a small smile and looked at the carpet instead of anyone's face. "Clara, my dear," Mrs. Bramwell said, "would you pass the lemon biscuits?" "Yes, madam," Clara whispered. She reached for the plate. Her hand hesitated, just for half a breath. Then she passed it on. Mrs. Grange watched the movement, every inch of it. Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders tightened. Miss Marple took note. People often reveal their feelings in the shoulders before the mouth. A small truth she had learned long ago in Street Mary Mead. "Is everything quite all right, Clara?" Miss Marple asked gently. Clara looked up too fast. "Yes, everything is fine." A fast answer. A brittle one. Mrs. Grange spoke next. "Clara has been tired lately. Long days, many tasks. I do my best to guide her." Her tone held firmness, but the guide her part caught Miss Marple's ear. It sounded less like guidance, more like control. Mrs. Bramwell looked between them, her lips pressed together. She seemed aware of something, but not ready to speak it. Miss Marple stirred her tea, slow, thoughtful, listening to a room that spoke without speaking. Clara stepped toward the window. She opened it an inch. Fresh air entered. Then she closed it again quickly, as if realizing she should not have touched it. Mrs. Grange's eyebrow lifted. Just a fraction. Enough. Clara backed away, hands behind her now, posture small, eyes lowered. Mrs. Bramwell sighed faintly, a sound that carried years. She looked toward Miss Marple, a look asking for help without asking aloud. Miss Marple returned a reassuring nod. She had seen this kind of strain before, a household with quiet pressures, ones that settle into corners, ones that change the air. She placed her cup down. Her eyes followed the housekeeper. Her attention followed Clara. Something had settled between them, something old, something unspoken. And Miss Marple knew she would hear the truth soon enough, because upstairs another small clue was waiting for her hand. Miss Marple rose from her chair with a small stretch. Mrs. Helena Bramwell insisted she take a little tour of the house. "Only the ground floor," Mrs. Bramwell said, "just so you see where everything is." Miss Marple agreed. A walk always helped her settle her thoughts. Clara Wentley offered to guide her. She seemed anxious to be useful. Her movements were neat, too neat, almost rehearsed. Mrs. Edith Grange watched from the doorway, her arms folded, her expression unreadable, a firm line at the mouth, a stiff line. Miss Marple stepped into the corridor. The air changed. A stronger scent reached her. Lavender again, but not the same as before. This one was sharper, concentrated, unnatural. She paused. "Clara, my dear, does Mrs. Bramwell use lavender often?" Clara blinked. "Oh, yes, sometimes," but her tone lacked ease. Miss Marple moved toward a small table along the wall. A bowl of potpourri sat there. She leaned closer. The scent was too strong for such a small amount. Clara shifted behind her. "Mrs. Grange refreshed it this morning," she said quickly. Too quickly. Miss Marple's eyes slid to the edge of the bowl. Petals scattered, but uneven, as if someone scooped out a handful and put it back without care. She turned slightly. Not enough to alarm Clara, just enough to take in the room. A chair nearby was out of line by an inch, only an inch. But furniture rarely moves itself by an inch. Someone sits. Someone rises too fast. Someone forgets to adjust what they disturbed. She lightly touched the back of the chair. A small gesture, soft, and her fingers found a faint trace of something on the wood. A powder, barely there. Light, pinkish. She said nothing. Yet Clara stood stiff, shoulders tense, breath shallow, eyes moving between Miss Marple and the doorway as if expecting someone to appear. "Are you feeling all right, Clara?" Miss Marple asked. "Yes, fine, completely, fine." Another quick answer, another practiced tone. Miss Marple gave a gentle smile. "I once knew a girl in Street Mary Mead who said she was fine quite often. One of those dear young things who tried to hide everything with a smile. In her case, she had misplaced a very important placed letter, and someone else was quite determined she not find it." Clara swallowed. Her hands tightened. She looked toward the end of the corridor. Mrs. Grange appeared there, suddenly, silently. her face calm, her posture rigid. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Grange asked. Clara, startled. Miss Marple did not. "Oh, yes," Miss Marple said softly. "I was admiring the table. Such tidy work." Mrs. Grange's eyes flicked to the bowl. Only for a second. She recovered quickly. "Thank you," she said. "We keep things orderly here." Miss Marple gave a polite nod, but inside, a small pattern clicked into place. A scent too strong. A chair moved a little. A stiff posture. A nervous answer. All small things that speak. She stepped away from the powder on the chair. She let Clara walk a step ahead. She let Mrs. Grange watch her. But she had seen enough to know one thing. Someone had tried to hide something, and had done a very poor job of it. Miss Marple woke early. She always did in a new house. Old habits, quiet habits, ones that helped her think. Ashwood House felt still, too still. A house usually speaks in the morning. Kettles, footsteps, doors. Small sounds that show life beginning. But this morning, silence sat in the hall. Miss Marple slipped on her cardigan and stepped out. No voices, no clatter, no gentle bustle from the kitchen. Just stillness. She moved toward the staircase slowly, listening, waiting. A house always tells a story, even when it tries not to. At the foot of the stairs, she met Mrs. Helena Bramwell. The elderly woman looked surprised. "Oh, Miss Marple, you're up early." Her smile was polite, but her eyes looked tired, more tired than yesterday. "I do enjoy the quiet hours," Miss Marple said, "and it seems the house is quieter than usual today." Mrs. Bramwell hesitated. "Yes, well, Clara usually starts the tea by now. She must be running late." Her voice held worry behind the calm. "Is she often late?" Miss Marple asked gently. "Never," Mrs. Bramwell said. She answered too fast, then softened. "She is very dependable, truly." Miss Marple nodded. Dependable people are rarely late without reason. A faint sound came from the kitchen. Not steady, not confident. Just a single cup placed down, too carefully. Miss Marple and Mrs. Bramwell walked in. Mrs. Edith Grange stood near the stove. Her posture was stiff. Her hands moved with unusual caution. She did not look up. "Good morning," Mrs. Bramwell said. Mrs. Grange replied without turning. "Morning." Miss Marple watched her. Shoulders, tight, drawn. Not the shoulders of a calm woman starting her day. "Is Clara unwell?" Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Grange's back straightened even more. "I suppose she overslept." Short answer. Clipped tone. No warmth. Mrs. Bramwell frowned. "That isn't like her." Miss Marple walked to the breakfast table. It was set halfway. Plates arranged. Cutlery still missing. A jug tilted slightly. A napkin folded too many times, then left undone. Signs of a routine interrupted. Mrs. Grange brought the teapot. Her steps heavy. Her face unreadable. She placed the pot down with a firm thud. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Grange rarely used more force than needed, but today her hands trembled. Only once. Then she folded them behind her apron quickly. "Shall I fetch Clara?" Miss Marple offered. Mrs. Grange's head snapped up. "No, I'll see to it." Too quick, too sharp. A tone meant to block any suggestion. Mrs. Bramwell looked between them. She sensed something. She didn't say it. Miss Marple poured tea for herself. The liquid moved quietly in the cup. She watched the steam rise. It carried the faint scent of lavender. Again, stronger than yesterday. And, out of place for breakfast. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Light, uneven, slow. Clara Wentley appeared at the doorway. Her face pale, her posture fragile, her eyes unfocused. Mrs. Bramwell gasped softly. "Clara, my dear, what on earth?" Clara tried to speak. A single word, barely a whisper. "Sorry." Miss Marple stood up. Something was wrong, and Clara had taken the first step into the truth before she suddenly swayed forward. Clara Wentley swayed forward. Her hands reached for the doorframe, but missed it. Miss Marple caught her arm gently. The girl's weight folded toward the floor. Slow, uncontrolled. Her eyes half open yet empty. Mrs. Helena Bramwell rushed to her side. "Clara, Clara, speak to me." Her voice trembled. Miss Marple lowered Clara carefully into a chair. Clara didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse faint, her skin cool. "Call Dr. Carter," Miss Marple said softly. No panic, just firmness. Mrs. Edith Grange stepped back with stiff posture. "I'll fetch him at once." She left quickly, too quickly for her usual careful manner. "Miss Marple," observed Clara silently. Clara's lips had a faint discoloration, barely visible, a pale line at the corners. She had seen such a line before. In another village, another house, another frightened girl who never admitted her troubles. Mrs. Bramwell hovered nearby. Her hands shook. "This isn't like her. She was fine last night. Well, mostly fine." Miss Marple didn't answer. Not yet. She reached for the teacup on the nearest tray. Clara's cup, still warm, still carrying a thin ribbon of steam. Miss Marple lifted it to her nose. A strange smell. Lavender, but mixed with something else. Sweet, sharp, unnatural, not something used in morning tea. She placed the cup back down, gently, then noticed a faint residue on the rim. Pinkish. Not tea, not sugar. She touched it lightly with a fingertip. The powder clung for a moment, then faded. Mrs. Bramwell saw her. "What is it?" she whispered. Miss Marple shook her head. Something that should not be there. Footsteps approached rapidly. Mrs. Grange returned with Dr. Lionel Carter. The doctor carried his small black bag. He knelt beside Clara at once. "Let me see her, doctor," Carter said. Calm voice, steady hands, but his brow furrowed within seconds. Pulse weak, breathing shallow, eyes unresponsive. He examined the teacup next, lifted it, sniffed it, stopped. "That is not lavender," he muttered. "Not alone." He looked at the powder on Clara's lips. He checked the inside of the cup with his sleeve. He nodded to himself. As suspected, a drug, a mild sedative, but far too strong a dose. Mrs. Bramwell pressed her hand to her mouth. "Drugged? But who would—" Dr. Carter didn't answer. He moved on. "Her window," he said. "I'd like to see her room." Miss Marple led the way quietly. She already knew something was off there. She just didn't know how much. They reached Clara's room. The window was open by exactly 2 inches. Not wide, not shut, just placed. As if someone wanted air, but not too much. Air. Miss Marple stood still. She pointed at the latch. "The position changed since yesterday." Dr. Carter checked it. "You're right." Miss Marple looked at the floor. A small mark beneath the sill. Light. Smudged. A shoe print? A touch of dust pushed aside? And something else. A thin strand on the carpet. Too neat. Too placed. Miss Marple bent slowly, picked it up, held it to the light. A single thread. From a glove? Not Clara's glove. Not Mrs. Bramwell's either. Someone else had been in this room, and Clara had never seen them. Miss Marple closed her hand around the thread. Just as a quiet step sounded behind her, Clara Wentley rested in her bed. Dr. Lionel Carter had given her a mild antidote. He said she would need time. No sudden movements, no strain, just rest. Mrs. Helena Bramwell sat beside her, holding her hand. Miss Marple stood at the foot of the bed. Her eyes moved slowly around the room. She did not speak. She did not rush. She simply looked. "It must have been an accident," Mrs. Bramwell whispered. Miss Marple did not answer. Accidents rarely hide themselves. She approached the dresser first. One drawer sat pushed in. Another sat pushed out. Only by a little, but enough to show a hurried hand. She opened the top drawer. Clothes folded neatly. Then a gap. A small empty space where something once lay. Miss Marple traced the outline with her fingertip. "Clara," she said softly, "did you keep anything important here?" Clara stirred weakly, her voice faint. "A notebook, a journal." Then she drifted off again. Miss Marple closed the drawer gently. Clue 1. A missing item. She turned to the bedside table. A book, a glass of water, a small lavender sachet. Too fragrant. Recently placed. She lifted it slightly. The scent rose sharply. too sharp for evening comfort. Someone had refreshed it. Someone had used it to mask another smell. Clue 2. A staged room. Mrs. Bramwell watched her. You think something was hidden or revealed, Miss Marple replied, depending on the intention. She moved to the window next. The latch sat crooked. Dr. Carter had noticed it earlier. Now Miss Marple examined it more closely. She pressed the wood. A faint smudge beneath the latch. A recent touch. Only one side of the frame disturbed. Mrs. Bramwell, Miss Marple asked, was this window open yesterday? No, Mrs. Bramwell said. Clara dislikes drafts. Miss Marple nodded. Clue 3 was forming. She returned to Clara's bedside. Dr. Carter lifted Clara's wrist gently to check her pulse again. As he set it back down, Miss Marple noticed faint marks on the skin. Not bruises. Light pressure marks. As if someone held her wrist, or pressed it while moving her arm. Clue 3. Marks on the wrist. Miss Marple leaned closer. Quiet. Thoughtful. She had seen similar marks in another case. A case where a young woman had been moved in her sleep to hide something taken from her room. She checked the floor next. Dust disturbed near the wardrobe. Only in one spot. Not across the room. Not in a pattern. Just one small space brushed aside. Someone had stepped there. Someone who did not want to be seen. Clue 4. Someone searched the room in the night. Mrs. Edith Grange entered slowly. Tea tray in hand. Her face firm. Her eyes guarded. Is she improving? She asked. Her tone controlled. Too controlled. Dr. Carter nodded. Yes, but it will take hours. Miss Marple watched Mrs. Grange over the port rim of her glasses. The housekeeper kept her hands behind the tray. Away from view. Away from questions. Miss Marple stepped aside. Her thoughts settled quietly. Patterns forming. Lines connecting. Pieces shifting into place. Something had been taken. Something had been hidden. Someone had moved through this room when the house slept. Miss Marple turned toward the doorway. Because now, she knew exactly which corner of the house she needed to check next. Miss Marple stepped into the hallway. She closed Clara's door softly behind her. Mrs. Edith Grange stood near the banister, her posture stiff, her hands clasped tightly, her face unreadable. Mrs. Grange, Miss Marple said gently. May I have a word? The housekeeper nodded, but her shoulders rose slightly, as if bracing for something. Miss Marple noticed. They walked toward the small sitting alcove near the stairs, a quiet place. No one close enough to overhear. Miss Marple began with kindness. I know mornings can be unsettled, especially after something unexpected. Mrs. Grange looked away. Yes, it has been unusual. Clara was found unresponsive. Miss Marple continued softly. She drank tea. Tea prepared in the kitchen. Mrs. Grange tensed. I prepare tea for everyone. Always have. Of course, Miss Marple said. No one doubts your skill. But I did notice her window was open yesterday, and today it was open again. Mrs. Grange's eyes flicked sharply. Toward her. It wasn't open yesterday. Miss Marple tilted her head. I stood beside it. Clara closed it herself last night. Mrs. Grange's jaw tightened. Well, perhaps someone touched it after her. Who? Miss Marple asked. A soft question. Not accusing. Just placed. Mrs. Grange hesitated. I wouldn't know. The window sticks. I told Clara not to touch it. Miss Marple smiled politely. That latch is not the sort that sticks. Very smooth, actually. Almost as if someone adjusted it recently. Mrs. Grange's eyes narrowed. She crossed her arms. Her stance changed. Guarded now. I am responsible for order in this house, she said, and I do not appreciate anyone implying otherwise. I am implying nothing, Miss Marple replied gently. I only wonder why things appear moved. Drawers, bowls, windows. Tiny things, really. Mrs. Grange's gaze lowered, then lifted again. Well, perhaps Clara moved them. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice quiet. Though Clara seemed frightened this morning, and you seemed unusually firm with her. Mrs. Grange drew in a sharp breath. She is young. She needs structure. Mrs. Bramwell relies on me to maintain the household properly. Miss Marple nodded. A very heavy responsibility. Mrs. Grange looked away again. She pressed her lips together. Half-answers had become her habit now. Clara overslept, Mrs. Grange said suddenly. She was careless. That is why breakfast was late. Clara did not oversleep, Miss Marple said softly. She was drugged. Mrs. Grange's grip tightened on her apron. For one moment, her eyes widened. Then she forced them back into control. I knew nothing about that, she said. Her voice firm, too firm. Miss Marple watched her hands that trembled for half a second, hands that betrayed the calm she tried to project. Mrs. Helena Bramwell appeared at the end of the hall. She paused. She sensed the tension. Her face grew worried. Mrs. Grange stepped back quickly. Mrs. Bramwell, I will bring tea to your room, and something warm for Clara. She hurried away before either woman could respond. Miss Marple remained still. She had seen enough. Mrs. Grange was hiding something real, something she feared would come out. But fear is not the same as guilt. And as Miss Marple turned toward the stairs, she felt a different presence watching her from the landing above. Miss Marple found Mrs. Helena Bramwell sitting alone in the small morning room. The elderly woman held a handkerchief in her lap. Her fingers twisted it softly. Her eyes were fixed on the garden, but she wasn't seeing it. Miss Marple entered quietly. "May I sit with you?" Mrs. Bramwell nodded without looking up. The room felt heavy, not from silence, from worry. "I should have said something earlier," Mrs. Bramwell murmured, her voice soft, thin, as if the words had been held back for too long. Miss Marple folded her hands. "What troubles you, my dear?" Mrs. Bramwell took a shaky breath. "It's Clara. She has been uneasy these past weeks." Miss Marple nodded. She had sensed it already. Mrs. Bramwell continued. "She told me someone had entered her room one night, quietly, while she slept." Miss Marple leaned in slightly. "What did she say exactly?" Mrs. Bramwell shook her head. "She couldn't see anyone. She woke to the sound of something falling. When she sat up, she felt the air move. She thought someone had just left." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "And she locked her door after that?" "Yes," Mrs. Bramwell said. "Every night, without fail. She said it made her feel safer. I didn't know what else to do for her." Miss Marple let the words settle. A room entered, a door locked, a fear unspoken. "There is more," Mrs. Bramwell whispered. Miss Marple waited. "Clara went to see a solicitor last week," she said. "She told me only after. She said she needed information about a document connected to my late husband." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "And did she find what she needed?" Mrs. Bramwell hesitated. "I don't know. She said she found enough. But she didn't explain. She just looked frightened." Miss Marple studied her face calmly. "What sort of document did you suspect?" Mrs. Bramwell closed her eyes briefly. "A matter of inheritance," she said. "My husband revised his will shortly before his passing. Clara asked about it. She asked questions only someone who had seen part of it would think to ask." Miss Marple listened. Every word mattered. Mrs. Bramwell continued. "Clara believed someone overheard her, speaking to the solicitor. She was certain of it. She said she felt watched afterward." Miss Marple's fingers tapped lightly against her skirt. "What made her so sure?" Mrs. Bramwell looked down. "Because the day after, she found her drawer open, the one where she kept her journal." Miss Marple said nothing. She didn't need to. Every detail connected. Every movement in Clara's room had meaning. "Mrs. Grange said Clara was imagining things," Mrs. Bramwell whispered. "But I believed her. Something in her eyes. She was truly afraid." Miss Marple reached out and touched her hand. "You did right to listen," Mrs. Bramwell exhaled shakily. "There's something else, something I haven't told even Clara. My husband left a note, a private note, one that mentioned Clara's family, and a promise he failed to keep." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, gently. "That is a very important detail." Mrs. Bramwell looked up, startled. "Do you think someone knew?" Miss Marple stood slowly. "Yes, I do." She turned toward the doorway. "Because now someone in Ashwood House had a reason to keep Clara silent." Clara Wentley stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. Dr. Lionel Carter sat by her bed. He checked her pulse again. It's improving, he said softly. She may speak in a moment. Mrs. Helena Bramwell leaned forward. Relief filled her expression. Oh, Clara. Thank goodness. Clara blinked twice. She looked confused at first, then frightened. Her gaze moved from Mrs. Bramwell to Miss Marple, then to the door. Is it morning? She whispered. Yes, my dear, Miss Marple said gently. You're safe now. Clara swallowed. Her throat was dry. She tried to sit up. Miss Marple helped her with a slow, steady hand. Clara's voice shook. I didn't mean for this to happen. Miss Marple nodded. Tell us what you can. Only what feels comfortable. Clara took a breath. She looked down at her hands. They trembled. But the words came. I found a document, she said. It was hidden in an old envelope. Inside a box of papers Mrs. Bramwell keeps in the study. Mrs. Bramwell looked startled. You went through that box? Clara nodded. I was dusting, and the papers slipped. The envelope fell out. I didn't mean to pry. It just opened. Miss Marple waited. Clara continued. It mentioned your late husband, Clara whispered, her voice small, and something he promised, something he never fulfilled. Mrs. Bramwell covered her mouth. I knew he kept secrets, but I didn't know what. Clara's eyes filled with tears. My family was involved, years ago. A financial agreement. He caused my father's ruin without realizing how much it would cost us. I thought, if I found the truth, maybe I could help set things right. Miss Marple gave a slow nod. And you wrote everything? Down? Yes. Clara nodded again. I kept a journal. Every detail, every line from that document, every suspicion I had. Miss Marple's face remained calm. But the journal is missing. Clara closed her eyes. Yes. It disappeared 2 nights ago. I woke up and found the drawer. Open. Someone had been in my room. Dr. Carter listened carefully. Mrs. Bramwell looked devastated. Clara continued. I visited a solicitor last week. I needed to confirm what the document meant. And when I left his office, I felt someone behind me. A man. I didn't see his face, but I heard his steps. Slow, deliberate. Miss Marple leaned in slightly. And you kept the document? Clara hesitated. She shook her head. No, I hid it. She pointed weakly toward her bedside table. In the lavender pouch, the scented one. I thought it was safe. Miss Marple reached for the pouch. She opened it gently. Empty. Clara gasped. No, it was there. I swear it was there. Miss Marple closed the pouch softly. Someone knew. Someone searched your room. Someone expected to find more than a journal. Clara held Miss Marple's hand tightly. I only wanted the truth. I didn't think it would put me in danger. Miss Marple gave a reassuring nod. You did nothing wrong, my dear. But inside her mind, pieces shifted. A hidden identity, a missing document, a frightened companion, a shadow following her. Miss Marple looked toward the doorway, because now someone in the house already knew Clara had spoken. When Clara drifted back to sleep, Miss Marple stepped out of the room. Mrs. Helena Bramwell followed her. Her steps were slow, her face pale. Miss Marple, there is something else, she whispered. A man came to the house yesterday evening. Miss Marple turned. What sort of man? Mrs. Bramwell pressed her handkerchief against her palm. I didn't meet him myself. Mr. Reed spoke to him. He said the man asked for someone, but not for Clara by name. Miss Marple waited. Mrs. Bramwell lowered her voice. He asked for the girl who calls herself Clara Wentley. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed gently. A careful, thoughtful narrowing. And did Mr. Reed tell him anything? No, Mr. Reed said. The man grew frustrated, raised his voice a little, then left suddenly. He was angry. Miss Marple nodded. May I speak to Mr. Reed? Mrs. Bramwell guided her through the back corridor and into the small greenhouse where Mr. Thomas Reed tended the plants. He was a thin man, with gentle eyes and slow hands. He looked up as they approached. Morning, ma'am, he said. Is Clara improving? Yes, Miss Marple said softly. Thanks to Dr. Carter. Mr. Reed exhaled with relief. Then Miss Marple asked, Mrs. Bramwell mentioned you had a visitor yesterday. Mr. Reed's hands stilled. Yes, Strange fellow. Didn't give a name. Tell me what you noticed, Miss Marple said. Mr. Reed nodded. He came just before dusk. Looked respectable at first glance. Coat neat, shoes polished, but his face, drawn, strained, as if he hadn't slept. Miss Marple waited for the details. Details always mattered. He wore gloves, Mr. Reed continued. Dark ones. Looked like he'd been handling papers or ink, fingers stained. I saw the marks when he adjusted his coat. Miss Marple gave a small nod. Ink-stained gloves. Interesting, Mr. Reed went on. He leaned on a walking stick. But not like a man, with an injury. More like a habit, or a show. The stick was worn at the base, well used, not decorative. Miss Marple's mind began its quiet work. Ink, papers, a false name, a walking stick, for posture, not pain. What did he ask for? Miss Marple asked. He asked to see the girl. Who calls herself Clara Wentley, Mr. Reed said. He said he had business with her. Old business, private business. Mrs. Bramwell looked startled. Clara never mentioned anyone. Mr. Reed shook his head. When I told him she wasn't available, he grew sharp. Not loud, just sharp, like a man who'd been waiting too long. Miss Marple watched his face carefully. Did he say why he needed her? Mr. Reed hesitated, then quietly answered. He said she had something that belonged to him. Miss Marple's eyes tightened slightly. And then he left? Yes, Mr. Reed said. He walked away fast, didn't look back, like a man who feared being seen. Mrs. Bramwell clasped her hands. Do you think he followed her from the solicitor's office? Miss Marple looked toward the house. Very likely. A cousin, a rival, perhaps even a creditor, someone tied to her family's past. She stepped toward the doorway, her voice calm. Certain. There is only one question now, Miss Marple said softly, and Mrs. Bramwell whispered. What question? Miss Marple turned her eyes toward Clara's window. Did that man leave? Ashwood House yesterday, or did he come back again in the night? Miss Marple found Mrs. Edith Grange in the linen room. The housekeeper folded sheets with sharp, tidy movements. Too tidy, too sharp. Her jaw clenched with each fold. Mrs. Grange, Miss Marple said gently. May I trouble you once more? Mrs. Grange did not look up. You seem very determined today, Miss Marple. I am, Miss Marple replied. A young woman was harmed in this house. It is only right to ask questions. Mrs. Grange's hands paused. Only for a second. Then she continued, folding. Miss Marple stepped closer. I understand a visitor came yesterday evening. Mrs. Grange's shoulders stiffened. No visitor came to the main door. That is true, Miss Marple said softly. But a visitor came to the back door. Mr. Reed spoke with him. Mrs. Grange's fingers tightened around the sheet. Mr. Reed talks too much. Miss Marple tilted her head. Or simply answers when spoken to. Something you struggled with this morning. Mrs. Grange's eyes darted toward her. A quick flash, then controlled again. Miss Marple continued. Why did you hide the man's arrival from Mrs. Bramwell? Mrs. Grange swallowed. Her throat bobbed once. I didn't want to upset her. Upset her, Miss Marple repeated softly. Or upset your position here? Mrs. Grange's nostrils flared. She looked away. That man had no business here. And yet, Miss Marple said quietly, he came asking for Clara, not by name, but by identity. Mrs. Grange turned sharply. She should not have brought her problems here. Mrs. Bramwell has enough burdens. Clara keeps secrets. Her past is messy. I saw it from the beginning. Miss Marple folded her hands. And you didn't want her to stay. Mrs. Grange's lips tightened. I wanted peace in this house. Miss Marple nodded slowly. A reasonable wish. But peace often hides fear. Mrs. Grange hesitated. Her eyes flicked downward. A crack in her posture. A soft tremble at the fingertips. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid her troubles would become ours. Afraid of another scandal. This house has seen enough. Miss Marple's voice softened. You thought the visitor came to cause trouble? Mrs. Grange nodded. Yes. He spoke like a man who owned her, as if she had run from him, or from something he controlled. I didn't want him near Mrs. Bramwell. Miss Marple studied the woman. Fear, not malice. Rigid worry, not guilt. "And the window?" Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Grange turned away. "I found it open last night. I closed it. That is all." "Why say it was never open?" Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Grange closed her eyes. "Because I didn't want questions. I didn't want Mrs. Bramwell to worry. I thought Clara did something foolish. I thought it was nothing." Miss Marple took a step closer. "People rarely lie for nothing, Mrs. Grange." Mrs. Grange's breath shook. "I just wanted Clara gone. I didn't want danger here." Miss Marple nodded. Her thoughts aligned. Mrs. Grange was hiding fear, not guilt. "Mrs. Grange," she said softly, "did that man return after dark?" Mrs. Grange's eyes widened. She opened her mouth, then closed it. A long pause followed. "I heard something at the back door," she whispered. "Late, very late. I didn't open it." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "Because if the back door moved in the night, someone else had entered Ashwood House while everyone slept." Miss Marple walked slowly down the hallway, her hands folded, her steps light, her mind busy. She had enough pieces now. Not all, but enough to see a shape forming. She paused outside Clara Wentley's room. Dr. Lionel Carter stood inside, checking. Her pulse again. Mrs. Helena Bramwell sat nearby, watching with worried eyes. Miss Marple did not disturb them. She kept walking, down the stairs, past the small alcove, toward the back corridor. Each step connected another piece. Clara had been drugged. The timing mattered. The cup had been left in plain reach. Tea prepared. Tea delivered. Tea trusted. Only then did Clara fall. Miss Marple thought of that cup. The residue. The scent. A soft smell covering a sharper one. Someone had been careful. Very careful. She turned into the study. The morning light fell across the old writing desk. Papers neatly stacked. Mrs. Edith Grange must have tidied them. Too tidy, perhaps. Miss Marple touched the edge of the desk. The visitor's gloves came to mind. Dark ink. Paper marks. A man used to reading documents. Or hiding them. She walked to the bookshelf. The lavender pouch still lay there. Empty. Someone had searched the contents. Someone who knew what to look for. Then she remembered Clara's words. "I wrote everything in my journal." And Mrs. Bramwell's whisper. Someone overheard her. Miss Marple moved toward the window. The latch had been lifted gently, not forced, not accident. A purposeful hand. She stood still for a moment, her thoughts aligned. Drugging. Placed at the perfect hour. Just before Clara could speak again. The cup. Left accessible. Placed carefully. Everyone distracted. The room. Searched twice. Once for the journal. Once for the document. The visitor. Asking for the girl who calls herself Clara Wentley. A strange phrasing. Not casual. Not friendly. A term used by someone claiming authority. The missing journal. The heart of Clara's fears. Every page contained her truth. Her family's history. Her link to Mrs. Bramwell's late husband. The inheritance strain. Mrs. Bramwell had admitted it softly. A will. A note. A broken promise. Money tied to Clara's past. Money that changed hands unfairly. Money that someone wanted to protect. Miss Marple closed her eyes. For a moment. Means. Motive. Opportunity. The means was simple. A drug. A scent. A cup. The opportunity was easy. Clara trusted everyone here. She followed routine. She slept lightly. But not lightly enough. But the motive. Still not whole. Fear? Perhaps. Money? Likely. Reputation? Always a possibility. But something else lingered. Something deeper. Something that tied the visitor. To the missing journal. To the old promise. To tonight. Miss Marple stepped out of the study. Mr. Thomas Reed stood at the far end of the hall, watching her quietly, as if waiting. Miss Marple looked at him. Then at the stairs. Then back at the lavender pouch. And in that moment, she realized exactly what question she needed to ask next, and who would fear the answer most. Miss Marple returned to Clara Wentley's room with quiet steps. Dr. Lionel Carter had gone. Downstairs. Mrs. Helena Bramwell remained close by, waiting in the corner with worried eyes. Clara slept again, her breathing soft, her face still pale. Miss Marple looked around the room slowly. She had searched it before, but hurriedly. Now she searched with purpose. She moved to the small table beside the bed. The lavender pouch lay there, empty. Someone had taken what mattered. She opened the drawer beneath it. Only hairpins and a folded handkerchief. Nothing more. Miss Marple turned toward the wardrobe. She checked each pocket, each corner. A few simple dresses. A worn cardigan. Nothing unusual. But Miss Marple's eyes always lingered on the small things. Things others overlooked. A seam slightly raised. A corner slightly bent. A scent stronger in one place than another. She stepped to the window. The latch still held its new scratch mark. Someone had touched it. Not long ago. Miss Marple moved to the dressing table. A brush, a comb, a bottle of light perfume, and under it, a small square of fabric slightly lifted at the edge. She paused, lifted it gently. Underneath the lining lay something flat, thin, paper-like. Miss Marple slipped it out carefully. A folded brown envelope, tiny, tucked with precision, hidden where a hurried searcher might miss it. Mrs. Bramwell gasped softly. "What is that?" Miss Marple opened the flap. Inside lay a small receipt, typed neatly, stamped with the date. Miss Marple read aloud, quietly. "Solicitor's office visit confirmed. Client, Miss Clara Wentley. Purpose, review of historical agreement." Mrs. Bramwell covered her mouth. So she kept proof. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, and she knew someone was after it. She checked the envelope again. Another slip appeared, even smaller, barely the size of a thumb. A torn piece of the old document. Just a fragment, but clear enough to show Bramwell Estate revised terms. Financial reconciliation. Pending. Miss Marple closed the envelope gently. This is what the culprit never found. Mrs. Bramwell trembled. "This means my husband knew there was an unresolved matter." Miss Marple nodded. "And Clara discovered it. She followed the truth quietly, carefully. But someone watched her." Mrs. Bramwell sank onto the chair. "She hid it here, in her room, of all places." Miss Marple gave a slow smile. "People often hide precious things near the most ordinary objects. It feels safer." She tucked the envelope into her handkerchief. We now know she was correct. Someone followed her after the solicitor visit. Someone feared exposure. And that someone, Mrs. Bramwell whispered, "Searched this room twice." Miss Marple lowered her voice. "Yes, and whoever it was still believes the proof is gone." She moved toward the doorway. "Because once the culprit realizes Clara survived, they will come looking again and sooner than anyone expects." Miss Marple walked through the hallway with slow, thoughtful steps. The house felt still, too still. Everyone waited for answers, but she already sensed the pattern. She stopped near the sitting alcove. Mrs. Helena Bramwell sat there, hands folded. Her eyes followed Miss Marple. "Is Clara in danger?" she whispered. Miss Marple gave a gentle nod. "Yes, but not from strangers. From someone who feared the truth." Mrs. Bramwell looked startled. "Truth about the document?" "Yes," Miss Marple replied softly, "and about the inheritance tied to it." Miss Marple sat beside her. She spoke in calm, small phrases. "Clara found the old agreement. She asked the solicitor to confirm it. Someone overheard. Someone panicked. That is when everything began." Mrs. Bramwell bowed her head. "You think the visitor was involved?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, "but his behavior shows frustration, not planning. He wanted something, but he did not drug her. His worry was loud, not hidden." Mrs. Bramwell swallowed. "Then who?" Miss Marple looked toward the stairs. "At first I thought Mrs. Grange acted from jealousy or irritation, but her lies came from fear, not guilt. She feared another scandal. She feared the house losing peace." Mrs. Grange stepped into view at that moment, her face pale, her hands tight. She had heard enough to look ashamed, but not alarmed. Miss Marple continued quietly. "The person who acted was not nervous, not frightened, not flustered. The person who acted was deliberate." Mrs. Bramwell blinked. "Deliberate?" "Yes," Miss Marple said. "Someone who knew exactly what Clara discovered. someone who felt cornered, someone who understood the financial implications more than any. Visitor or housekeeper? Mrs. Bramwell stared at her. What implications? Miss Marple folded her hands. Your late husband owed Clara's family compensation, a promise he avoided, a promise tied to the estate. If Clara confirmed the document, she could challenge the current inheritance. Mrs. Bramwell's breath caught. So someone here feared losing everything. Miss Marple nodded. And that person took the first step the very night Clara returned from the solicitor. A search of her room, quiet footsteps, calm hands, not rushed, not messy. Mrs. Bramwell whispered, "Someone who knew the house well." "Exactly," Miss Marple replied. "Someone who moved with confidence, someone who believed Clara had no right to uncover the past, someone who saw her as a threat." Mr. Thomas Reed appeared at the far end of the corridor. His eyes followed the conversation. A shadow passed across his expression. Miss Marple remained still. She watched him without looking directly at him. She continued speaking, her tone steady. Drugging Clara was a controlled act, the dosage mild, enough to silence her, not enough to harm permanently. That takes knowledge, calmness, planning. Mrs. Bramwell whispered, "Not Mrs. Grange. She panics too easily." "No," Miss Marple said softly. "Not her." Mrs. Bramwell looked confused. "Then who?" Miss Marple rose. She took a single step into the hallway. Now she understood. Every movement, every delay, every carefully placed detail. Someone acted first because they feared Clara's proof more than anything else in their life. Someone who had much to lose, and even more to hide. Miss Marple turned her head slightly, because at that moment she finally saw which person, in Ashwood House, had been waiting for Clara to never wake again. The drawing room filled slowly. Mrs. Helena Bramwell sat nearest the fireplace. Clara Wentley rested on a cushioned chair, still pale but awake. Mrs. Edith Grange stood rigidly near the wall. Dr. Lionel Carter kept close to Clara. Mr. Thomas Reed waited by the doorway, arms folded lightly. Miss Marple remained standing. "Thank you all for coming," she said softly. "There is much to explain, and now is the proper time." Everyone watched her. No one spoke. Miss Marple began calmly. Clara was drugged. The tea she drank contained a mild sedative. Not enough to harm her long term, just enough to silence her for a night. Mrs. Bramwell gasped. Mrs. Grange looked down. Dr. Carter nodded once, confirming the detail. Miss Marple continued. The drug was placed in the teacup before it reached Clara. Someone knew her routine. Someone knew where the cup would be. Someone who had easy access. Mrs. Grange bristled. "I prepare tea, yes, but I never—" Miss Marple raised a gentle hand. "I know. If you wished harm, your fear would not have been so visible. You hid the visitor because you hoped to avoid trouble, not because you caused it." Mrs. Grange swallowed hard but said nothing. Miss Marple turned slightly. "The journal was stolen 2 nights ago. Clara kept it in her drawer. Only someone confident in the layout of the house could enter quietly, search calmly, and leave, without waking her." Clara gripped the armrest. "I heard something that night. I thought it was a dream." Miss Marple nodded. "It was not a dream, my dear." She looked toward the window. The room was staged. Items placed slightly wrong. Drawer left ajar. Window latch lifted. These details matter. They show a methodical hand, not a frantic one. Mr. Reed shifted his weight. Miss Marple continued. The window was opened for 2 reasons: to let out the stronger scent of the sedative, and to make it appear as if someone came from outside. A false trail. Mrs. Bramwell whispered. "Then the visitor." "Yes," Miss Marple said quietly. "The visitor came for Clara, but not for this crime. He sought a debt, a family matter. He followed her after the solicitor's visit, but he left when refused entry. His anger was real, but not directed toward poisoning." Miss Marple rested her hands lightly in front of her. "And now the timeline fits. The room was searched first, then the tea drugged, then the window staged. The sequence is steady, controlled, without panic." Her eyes moved slowly around the room, then settled on one person. "The real culprit is the one who understood what Clara found, what the old document meant, who feared the solicitor visit most, who feared losing money tied to the estate. She paused. The room tightened. The real culprit, she said softly, is Mr. Thomas Reed. Mrs. Bramwell gasped. Clara froze. Mrs. Grange stepped back. Mr. Reed stood still, very still. Miss Marple spoke gently. You handled the estate papers when Mr. Bramwell fell ill. You knew about the revised agreement. You knew a claim could challenge the inheritance you expected as pension. Clara's visit to the solicitor terrified you, so you silenced her. Mr. Reed opened his mouth, closed it. His face hardened. Miss Marple's voice remained soft. The truth sat quietly in the open, waiting to be noticed. She took one small step forward, and in that quiet room, Mr. Reed finally realized he had no place left to hide. Clara Wentley rested comfortably now, her breathing steady, her eyes calmer. The worst had passed. Mrs. Helena Bramwell sat beside her, holding her hand with quiet relief. The strain on her face softened at last. The house felt gentler, still cautious, but gentler. Mrs. Edith Grange moved quietly through the room, not rigid anymore, only tired, only grateful the truth was finally spoken. Dr. Lionel Carter gave Clara one last check. All will mend, he said softly, and it would. Miss Marple stood near the window, her voice warm, her tone steady. Fear makes people hide things, she said, and hiding invites more fear. But truth, even when unwelcome, clears the air. Kindness must guide it, not suspicion, not anger. Mrs. Bramwell nodded. Clara nodded too. The house settled into a softer rhythm. But Miss Marple paused, because one small detail still tugged at her mind. Later that evening, Miss Marple stepped into the quiet hallway. The house had settled, but not fully. On the small table near the stairs lay a torn lavender sachet. Beside it, a glove with a faint ink smudge on the thumb, and a folded note, no, one claimed. Even a tiny footprint near the back door, half blurred by the mat. Miss Marple studied the items one by one. Her eyes softened, her thoughts deepened. Secrets never left a house completely, not even tonight. She whispered gently to herself, and somewhere, another secret waited. Thank you for joining us tonight, dear listeners. I'm Davis, and it's always a comfort to share these quiet mysteries with you. Tell me, what details stood out to you first, and where are you listening from this evening? Share your thoughts below. I read every one. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's tale. And as always, tomorrow, another kettle will boil. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with us. Subscribe for more gentle mysteries, and tap the next video to keep the story mood alive. We'll be here again tomorrow night. Warm kettle ready, waiting to share another secret from Mapleford Village.